If we take away everything else, what are the two things that worry leaders the most? I'm going to put it to you that in today's world, the two things that worry leaders the most are, one, managing cash, so being able to pay bills as and when they're due, and number two, being disrupted. So having someone come from within your industry or even outside of the industry to significantly change the environment so that you don't have any cards to play to compete against them. So think taxis with Uber or Blockbuster or Kodak, these kind of large companies that were very successful that were completely disrupted by someone else. So they're the two things I think that are worrying people the most in today's environment: having enough cash and being disrupted. First of all, I want to talk about digital disruption. And digital disruption happens because people are not paying attention and they're not willing to disrupt their own industry. Let's take that back a little bit further. In the past, the S&P 500 average company had an average lifespan of 67 years. Today, the average lifespan of a company in the S&P 500 is 12 years. Salim Ismail explained that disruption doesn't happen overnight. It seems like it does when you're not paying attention, but disruption doesn't happen overnight. As he explained it, it takes up to 40 years to go from when we first hear about a revolutionary technology in a science journal or perhaps in the media, from that point to the point where it dramatically impacts the industry. I had this fantastic chart which explains that. So we kind of hear about a new technology, it's going to make our lives better, it's going to change the world, and then we kind of go into this phase of disappointment over a long period of time where we think, well, it didn't really change the world, nothing really mattered. And then as the technology is refined and improved and it gets closer to commercialization or early adopters begin to use it, we go further and further up to this point where we say we are here, and then by that time we are getting towards what he calls chaos and amazement. He used this example saying that most management or leadership teams are thinking linear because that's the way that the human brain is wired, and we've always had to think linear through tens of thousands of years of evolution. We're all thinking linear, but the changes that are occurring, once we've excluded the disappointment from the potential of these changes initially, we're getting through to this chaos and amazement, and this is exponential, and we can't comprehend exponential. The way that he described exponential thinking versus linear thinking, if I were to take 30 linear steps, I would be out on the road. If I were to take 30 exponential steps, I would travel 26 times around the planet. That's the difference between linear and exponential. And we can't grasp its exponential growth. We can't grasp the difference because our brain is hardwired to only think linear. And then when we apply that to leadership teams and executive team thinking, we just can't grasp that. So what is the way to work around that? How can we work with that? Regular analysis of what's happening, regular offsites, regular strategic planning, regular analysis of trends within the industry to be able to try to assess any of these external threats. If we aren't undertaking regular strategic planning to step outside of the business and ask, how are we working towards our long-term strategy, i.e. 10 years plus, in the next 90 days? What is going to impact our strategy in the long term? How are we going to improve our strategy? What are the outside trends and threats that could challenge us on that? If we want to avoid these external threats, the quicker we know about it and can act on it and are able to understand the strategic implications of that, the better. Salim Ismail, I saw him the first time in Las Vegas a few years ago, and his book is Exponential Organizations. It's a great read on this level of disruption and how companies can evolve to be what he calls an exo or an exponential organization. Again, that's Salim Ismail, a great read in trying to understand how to avoid this disruption that has affected so many people, and it's only going to get worse. So that's number one, which is being disrupted. Number two, how do I pay all of the bills as and when they're due? What if I run out of cash? What happens? How can I keep the lights on? Well, in this case, I'm going to talk about Greg Crabtree. Now, Greg Crabtree was the co-author in the cash section of Scaling Up, and his book is Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. Within that, he talks about the core capital target. Core capital target, which is the third force of cash flow. Now, I've been using this for many years. I called it the new zero. But what the essential principle is getting your business to have 2 months of fixed expenses cash at bank. So that is being able to pay all of your salaries, rent, electricity, advertising, the key elements that keep the business running. If you're in a service or manufacturing business where you've got materials that you need to buy, not including that, but labour, electricity, rent, etc. All of that, being able to pay that for 2 months and having that as in a separate bank account. That's what we call the core capital target. And that provides a liquidity position, or it provides a buffer between the edge of the cliff and where you are now. So many small and medium businesses operate so close to the edge of the cliff that really, if a few customers didn't pay their bills or paid several weeks late, they would be in a bind. And the reason for that is A, lack of discipline, but B, as an owner, there are so many people who are demanding money from everywhere, from pay rises to capital expenses, so buy me a new computer or a new car, or we need to repair this piece of equipment or whatever it might be. There are so many demands on cash, and without that kind of level of discipline to get to that point, it can be a real problem. So getting to this 2 months of fixed expenses cash at bank, because what that means is that effectively, if all customers stop paying their bills, you would have 2 months to figure out how to start selling again, rather than the average, which I put to you, is probably closer to 1 to 2 weeks. It sounds scary. So we've got a specific formula, it's outlined in Scaling Up, but exactly what I want to address is getting to this. So yes, you need to be profitable, and you're not going to be able to do it in any short amount of time. our formula begins with paying, first of all, having the owners pay themselves the correct amount. In other words, if you had to be replaced in your job, what would it cost to have someone come in and do your job? Pay yourself that amount. Number 2 is having money set aside in a separate account to pay taxes as and when they're due. Number 3 is having short-term debt, i.e. having your overdraft or facility being paid down. And then number 3 is the core capital target. So this could take years to do, but if you're worried about, as most people are, what is the strength of the business, that's the basic formula that we apply and that we recommend. Work through those 3 things and then work to achieve this 2 months of fixed expenses cash at bank. Question. We've got a manager in our business and this person isn't really hitting their numbers, and the numbers is around having that person's team to be achieving their KPIs and to have a good satisfaction rating so that the people are happy and they're producing the results that they need. But this person doesn't seem to be achieving those results, and so we'd like to know how do we get to get this person to become a better manager or to step up? Well, I think in this case, the opportunity really comes around getting the person to understand the job of a manager is to get the most out of every person who reports to them. So to get more out of each person than they might think is otherwise capable. And that's not because they're whipping them harder, that's just a function of their leadership, that they are leading, providing an example, being inspirational, and getting the person to do the right thing. So in this case, get the person to understand, first of all, that the job of a leader is to get the most out of every person. Number 2, are you getting the most out of every person using qualitative and quantitative data? So that is, in our terminology, that is employee net promoter score. So how are people rating this person in terms of pure numbers, and start, stop, keep. So when we're having start, stop, keep conversations, or conversations to say, what should we start doing in this business, what should we stop doing, and what should we keep doing, we've then got that data to talk to this manager about, well, this is the actual data and the quantitative data, and this is the qualitative data that we're hearing. What is it that you could do to be a better manager? How do we feel together that you could be a better manager? And then from there, trying to determine a way to get the person to be able to perhaps list out a number of ways that they could improve. Again, in the context of the job of a manager is to get the most out of every person. So how can you get more out of the people under you? What's preventing that? And then getting a list together of actionable items that they can work with. But then finally, trying to get that person into a peer coaching arrangement. So that's not employing an external coach necessarily, but picking another person within the organisation that manager can buddy up with so that they can work through together, maybe at an hour a week or something like a session like that, to be able to work through those issues and see if over time that peer coaching arrangement can be effective.